Hi, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Through the Storm, a show about finding hope in God through the various trials and tribulations of life. I want to thank you for tuning in again, and we have a very special show today, a very important show. As many of you may know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And domestic violence is something that impacts all communities, all nationalities, all races, all genders, and sometimes when not dealt with can have very long lasting effects that can go from generation to generation. And I'd like to introduce and welcome my very special guest, Mr. Edward Land. And I am so happy that he's here. He is one of our interns with Soul Care Christian Counseling Services, and he's says he's new at this.
I am.
And he says he's a little nervous, but I think he'll do just fine. But I'd like for him to share a little bit of information about himself.
Okay, well, right now I'm actually a student at Johnson C. Smith University. I am a master's and getting my master's in social work degree, and I'm currently working at social services in Cabarrus County. I'm working in the crisis unit where I help clients with anything related to crisis, whether it's bills, domestic violence. It could be anything related to any issue that you may face. And I'm actually one of the social workers there, and I actually help advocate for clients on their behalf.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you again for being here. And I wanted to share a little bit of information, and I wanted to share, some detailed information about domestic violence, because I think a lot of times when people are in these situations, there's a lot of silence that comes with it. There's a lot of feelings of shame that come along with it, and a lot of people sometimes don't even know exactly what domestic violence is. So if you bear with me for a few minutes, I wanted to share some information from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control. And those two words are very important, power and control, perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats, emotional, psychological abuse, and I'd also like to add spiritual abuse. The frequency and severity of domestic violence varies dramatically. And I wanted to share a few important statistics just to put some numbers to it. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. And 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have been severely physically abused by an intimate partner. Intimate partner violence is most common among women between the ages of 18 and 24. So why does it matter? Domestic violence is something that's prevalent in every community, affects people of all races, socioeconomic statuses, gender, religion, race, and nationality. And often it's accompanied by emotionally abusive and controlling behavior, and is part of a much larger systematic pattern of dominance and control. Domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. The consequences are devastating and can often last and go from generation to generation. Domestic violence includes sexual assaults. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 59 men in the United States are raped during their lifetime. And that is a lot of people when you're talking about the U.S. population. Stalking is also included. And homicide, with homicide, 1 in 3 female murder victims and 1 in 20 male murder victims are killed by intimate partners. A study of intimate partner homicides found that 20% of victims were family members or friends of the abused partner, neighbors, persons who intervened, law enforcement responders, or bystanders. So even though you may not be the actual person being abused, if you come into contact with someone who is, it's very important that you know about this issue so that just for your safety, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And let's see. So physical and mental effects. Victims of intimate partner violence are at increased risk of contracting HIV or other STDs. Intimate partner victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior, and only 34% of people who are injured by intimate partners receive medical care for their injuries. So there's so many people that don't speak up. This is often considered a silent problem, and we're hoping to encourage people to break the silence. I'll share a little bit about the economic effects of domestic violence. Victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year, which is equivalent to 32,000 full-time jobs. And intimate partner violence is estimated to cost the U.S. economy between $5.8 billion and $12.6 billion annually. And between 21 to 60% of victims lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from abuse. Between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace by former or current intimate partners. This amounts to 22% of workplace homicides among women. So I just wanted to say all of that just to kind of paint a picture of how important this topic is. And because a lot of people don't really know exactly what domestic violence is, most of the time we think of it as physical abuse, like hitting, punching, kicking, that kind of things, but it's so much more. It can include intimidation, making a woman, and I'm saying women for the most part because 95% of victims of domestic violence are usually women. There are men who are victims of domestic violence, but most of them are women. So intimidation, making her afraid by using looks, actions, and gestures, smashing things, destroying property, abusing pets or children, displaying weapons. There may be emotional abuse, putting the woman down, making them feel bad about herself, calling her names, making her think she's crazy, playing mind games, humiliating her, or making her feel guilty. Isolation, controlling what she does, who she sees and who she talks to, what she reads, and where she goes, limiting her outside involvement, using jealousy to justify actions. Minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse and not taking her concerns about it seriously, saying the abuse didn't happen, shifting responsibility for abusive behavior, or saying that she caused it. Using children. Often perpetrators may use the children to make the woman feel guilty about the children, use the children to relay messages, use visitation to harass, threaten to take the children away. There's also economic abuse, preventing her from getting or keeping a job, making her ask for money, giving her an allowance, taking her money, not letting her know about finances or having access to family income. Male privilege, that is when a male may treat her like a servant, he's making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men's and women's roles. And coercion and threats, making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her, threatening to leave her, commit suicide or self-harm, or reporting her to welfare, making her drop charges, making her do illegal things. I could go into much more detail, but those are some of the actual things that make up domestic violence. And another thing I'd like to share and make sure you know, and this might seem like a lot of information, but I remember when I learned it and it was very helpful to me. There's something called a cycle of abuse, and it includes like 4 different cycles or phases that kind of, because different abuse, it usually follows a certain pattern. So the first phase is the tension buildup stage, which includes a breakdown of communication, belittling, name-calling, intimidation, and humiliation begin. There's tension building up, and fear starts to rise in the victim. And as he or she feels the need to please or calm the abuser, that's the tension building up phase. And next, there's the incident, which is the emotional, verbal, and or physical abuse occurs. There's anger, blaming, rage, arguing, threats, intimidation, etc. And the third stage is reconciliation. In this stage, the abuser starts to become apologetic. They begin to feel guilty. They shift blame. They may deny the abuse or the incident. They may give excuses for what they did. They may claim abuse themselves and become the victim, or they may say the incident wasn't bad like the victim thinks. and or proclaims. And then the last stage is the honeymoon stage. The incident is over, is forgotten about, and the abuser regains control, acts as if nothing happens. The victim is hopeful and thinking that maybe, okay, this is over, the perpetrator has changed, this won't happen again, and they start to show normal behavior, and no abuse occurs during this phase until time goes by, and then they start the tension build up all over again and repeat the cycle. And we are going to go to a little break, and when we come back, we'll start to talk about some things that we can do to help those who are in this situation of domestic violence. As we continue. So I wanted to ask Mr. Land if he could tell us a little bit about his services and what he does. And I am just very thankful to have him on here as a male. Oftentimes when we're talking about domestic violence, we have the face of females and we are hearing their side of the story. Sometimes we don't get to hear the side of the male, but I'm encouraged to know that there are males that work in this field and who are out there advocating for the rights of women and men experiencing domestic violence. So, Edward, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay. I am actually a social worker at Social Services, and I actually help people that have been in domestic violence situations. We refer out to outside resources when we can't assist them at Social Services. We actually refer out to therapy where clients want therapy for the situation, and then we explain the policy behind that, where some clients may have to have Medicaid when they go to certain therapy sessions or whatnot. And we also give out different shelters for battered women and men that have been in domestic violence situations. And some of the outside resources that we actually help refer clients out to in Cabarrus County is one that's called CVAN. And the CVAN houses domestic violence women.
Okay.
And they actually do support groups. They do therapy. They have shelter there for them.
Okay.
And one-on-one contact with them and trying to get them in a state of mind so where they can be able to function on their own.
Okay.
Another one is called Peaceful Places Incorporated in Concord. And they actually have one here in Charlotte as well.
Okay.
And they actually help out with people that have been dealing with domestic violence with the female or men also.
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned CVAN, and you said that's in Cabarrus County?
Cabarrus County.
Okay. I believe in Mecklenburg County, Safe Alliance is a very similar organization, and they offer resources and help women to get in shelter, get restraining orders, provide counseling to be able to help them navigate out of those situations.
Yes, very helpful, good places. And outside of that, I know we was talking about domestic violence, and while you was talking, it hit me, and I was actually myself. I went through domestic violence as a little boy, and I actually was molested from age 5 until 15, and didn't know how to get out of the situation. Went through life and didn't know how to navigate and how to have a good mindset and how to get out of it, and didn't know who to tell. I just suffered and cried and suffered and cried. Couldn't tell my friends, didn't know where else to go. And when I got older, in my late 20s, I decided to share it with my father. And actually, when I shared it with him, it broke his heart that he wasn't aware of the situation I was in. And of course, they taught me through it. They asked me to go to therapy and what I needed and everything. And by me going through that, and actually made me want to become a social worker, to actually want to help other people that I can advocate for, and people that don't know where to go and what outside resources to, because I didn't know where to go. So actually being a social worker, it helps me to go out and research and try to find outside resources to help men and women that go through domestic violence.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that testimony. And you hit on several important things.
Yes.
You know, domestic violence and sexual abuse, it doesn't just happen to females, it happens to males as well.
Yes.
And the impact can be very devastating. And, you know, that support is very needed
Yes.
and crucial in order to turning things around.
Yes, it is.
And let me ask to kind of veer off a little bit. If you like looking back in hindsight is 2020, what are some things that you think could have helped you to break that silence?
As a child, I guess parents should actually talk about these things to the children while they're young, growing up, because ask questions, let them know what body part not to touch, or what are people saying to you, whether it's male or female, and kind of get into your child's head to see what they're thinking or what's going on in their life.
Right.
And I will also suggest talk about stuff like when you go to church. I know some churches don't disclose information like that, but educate the members of the church about domestic violence, about what not to do, and how to go about telling the person, and also just become aware and also have different support groups. Attend support groups, even if you don't know if a person in your family is being molested or has been suffering through domestic violence. Attend support groups, and sometimes therapy will help. So if I could go back in time, I would say I would attend support groups. I wish my parents were more educated on some of the things, but when you lack education, it kind of hinders you from knowing certain things. And then my father, he worked, stayed working, worked. But while he was gone, stuff was going on, and I didn't know what to say. I was told to hush, and next when someone tells you to be quiet about certain things, actually you get scared because you don't know what's going to happen if you be quiet and hush about certain what they're saying. So you don't know if they're going to hurt you, they're going to beat you up, they're going to kill you, or they're going to hurt your family. So as a child, you're just nervous and scared. You don't know what to do. So I would just advocate for the children now. And for me, going back in time, I would attend support groups and actually have people to be around positive people, someone that you can trust, and that sometimes some people that you think you trust is the ones that actually be the ones that hurt you.
Right. Yeah, large amount of domestic violence and sexual assaults are from people that are close to us, sometimes family members or friends of family members. So yeah, it's very important to speak out, and for parents to talk to their children, and for families to discuss these issues, because oftentimes these issues, they go from generation to generation to generation, and we just keep repeating this cycle of abuse and misuse. Another topic that you mentioned, which is important to me, because for Soul Care Christian Counseling, we offer Christian counseling and faith-based counseling. And one thing that's very dear to my heart is trying to bring awareness of mental health more into the church, and trying to figure out things that the church, our church families can do to help the parishioners. Because oftentimes, you know, you never know what people are going through, because we're not speaking up. You know, we're told what goes in this on in this house, it stays in this house. And you know, if you're going through what you were going through, you know, people, they silence you in different ways. And so it's important, like you said, to kind of bring these things out in the open and have conversations about them. And a lot of times in our churches, we're very silent about those things.
And also, I guess validation in the home is also very important when it comes to parents and the child. Validate their child, tell them that they're beautiful, tell them that they love them. If you don't get the validation at home, who else they can get it from? If they get it from out in the streets, it'd be the wrong person. And when the child doesn't have validation, and it comes from the parents telling them that they love them and care and actually want to spend time with them, it kind of veers the child out to another direction, and then that direction can be harmful to the child present and in the future.
And that is so true. So having that validation and that nurture, filling those voids inside the home, coming from the parents, you know, that is very crucial, because there are a lot of people that are out there that would try to fill those voids. And a question that some of us, you know, people of faith might ask, where is God in all of this? Did you have any thoughts about that? related to your experience?
With me, I was growing up as a child, and when I was growing up, I would go to church, and I attend church. I listened to the pastor and everything, and I was wondering, God got to be here. I felt him as a child spiritually, and I was like, why would he let something like this happen to me? And I didn't ever understand it at the time growing up, and till I got older, I was in 30s when I first started doing my social work, in my social work field, and I started I thought about my mindset. You go through to help someone else out in a situation. So with that, I always thought that I had to go through it in order to help someone. And I knew he was with me while I was going through. I just couldn't see it at the time, but now that I'm older, and I saw that he was with me from the time I was a child to now, I didn't lack anything. I didn't lose anything. I kept my mental capabilities still there, and I'm smart, and then it actually hindered me from my thought process with going to school. I was also in a learning disability course all the way from time I started school until 8th grade.
Really?
When I got into 9th grade, they actually transitioned me to a full-time student and going to regular classes. Didn't know what to do, and also going through that mentally with that molestation and everything in my head. And I was like, God, I know this got to be something better than this. And I prayed, cried. That's all I can do. I didn't ever say it to my parents and everything. My mom died when I was 6 years old, and so I couldn't go to her, and I feel like as a man, you would want your mom there, and I couldn't go to her. And while I was going on after high school, I was praying. I want to get more educated. I want to know how to understand, become more think critical about certain things. And I started transitioning probably about 19 or 20. I started going to community colleges, started getting B's on my report card and everything like that. And I was like, okay, God, I feel a little transition. I know you're there, you ain't leaving me, so I know you're there. So then I ended up going to Shaw University, and I finished my undergrad there with social work, and I actually finished with a 3.27 GPA.
You go ahead
So
on
I
to
graduated
yourself.
cum laude, and I was like, well, God, I know you was there the whole time. I didn't know how you're gonna do it.
Wow.
And then he's here now because I never thought that I was going to a master's program, because I didn't think I was smart enough to attend or go to college. So now I look back over my life, and I'm like, wow, how did all this happen? After now, I'm getting my master's, and
he's an advanced master's in social work student.
Started in advanced level. I was like, oh God, I know this got to be you, because this is not me. So, and now I'm doing good. I haven't got to see it, thank God. So it's a blessing. And now some people are like, why you always post stuff on Facebook about school? Because you don't know my story. You don't know what I went through. So when I share it and I actually see people that go through it, kind of gives me a drive to want to help people, and and that alone, I'm looking back over my life, and I was like, God, you was there from the beginning. I never thought about. I felt you there, but I didn't get the actual feel until actually I got in my later years. So,
Amen.
yeah.
Amen. Thank you so much for sharing that testimony, and that is just. It's an awesome testimony, and I'm very grateful that you had your father there. That's a very important role, that you had him there to kind of validate you and to believe your story. That's very important when hearing these things. So that is awesome. And to be able to look back and see where God was. And I just want to share a little bit more about the heart of God. The heart of God hates violence. Psalms 11:5 says, the Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked and those who love violence his soul hates. God judges those who are violent. God said to Noah in Genesis 6:13 that I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence. And there's many scriptures in the Bible where God gives and shows his heart towards violence, because sometimes in the church we, kind of make excuses and brush things under the rug. And we use the Bible to justify being quiet and brushing things under the rug and not dealing with them. And so it's very important to know that it's not experiencing any kind of violence or sexual abuse is not the heart of God. And God, is okay when we start to set boundaries of trying to move out of that. I want to share a few more things. before we go. All right. Let's see. Okay. So, in talking about domestic abuse in the home and between intimate partners, what are some of the kind of people that perpetrate this violence? A lot of times, people who perpetrate this violence, they grew up watching it in their homes. They may have experienced it as a child. They may view that partner as a possession instead of a person, fear losing them, see themselves as a victim, not have a biblical view of the role that we play as people. People ask, why don't people leave situations? In your situation, you were a child, so where could you go?
Couldn't go, but had to stay there and endure it until they know how to tell us. Don't say nothing. Don't do that. Oh God, I can't say anything. So I didn't do it, and then it stopped, and I was going to it's going to stop.
So, and so for an adult, it's hard for them to leave as well. A lot of times, people ask, why do women stay? And she might be scared that her husband, what he's going to do if she leaves. She may believe that abuse is normal. A lot of women hear that, from other women, like, oh, this happened to me when I was, younger, and, you get over it, you get past it. You may have low self-esteem or be afraid that your children will be taken. And usually, when people actually get to the point where they decide to leave, they've had a mindset change. And in your situation, was there a point where your mind kind of changed and you said no more, or did it just end?
Actually, it just ended. And then as a child, you're like, well, why did it stop? Or why didn't it do that? But you thought it was coming, and it won't come. And I was like, it just ended.
It just ended. Okay. Okay. And I thank God for that.
Yes.
And sometimes when people are going through it, like in an intimate partner situation, sometimes the victim gets fed up eventually.
Yes.
They finally realize that situation is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. And that leaving it might be the only way to make a difference, or the violence is intensifying and it's a life or death situation, or the children are being hurt for different reasons. People sometimes eventually kind of stand up and make a decision that they're going to leave. So I wanted to talk a little bit more too. How much time do I have? Did I go over? Okay. A lot of times in the church, I want to talk about that. Sometimes in the church with spousal abuse or abuse in married couples, they use scriptures, wives submit to your husbands, to justify abuse. And most of the time people don't read the whole scripture, Ephesians 5:22 through the end. Because if you read the whole scripture and the whole verse in the context, it goes on to say that husbands should love their wives the way that Christ loved the church. And Christ was the head of the church, and no head of a body abuses its body. It just doesn't happen. And so it's very important to really know the word and to, I guess, have leaders around you that are going to support the word. And I just wanted to close and just urge pastors to, speak about these things in your congregation, because these things are going on amongst church people just like non-church people. And it's very important to bring it out in the open. The enemy works in secrecy and isolation, and sometimes when we don't know, like you mentioned, lack of knowledge, we just don't know, the enemy can just wreak havoc and continue to allow sin. And so it's important to bring these things out in the open. So I encourage you to learn more about domestic violence and just speak about it. Let your parishioners know that this is a safe place where they can bring those issues, leave them at the altar, talk about them, expose it for what it is, and be able to get help for it. I'd like to thank my guest, Edward, again for coming in, and thank you for sharing your story. And thank you all for listening, and until we meet again, please join us next week, and watch us on Tuesdays on the Wake Up Call Network.